Welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. You might be expecting Bob Kramer here with Jacquelyn Kung. Unfortunately, Bob had to have emergency surgery. He is doing fine. He's recovering okay, so I don't look very much like Bob Kramer. I don't sound very much like Bob Kramer, but Jacquelyn Kung looks like Jacquelyn Kung, and we are going to have a wonderful conversation. Before we get started, let's begin with this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. So first off, Jacqueline, where are you doing Foresight TV from today? We got to talk about that just in case it gets a little exciting.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hello from Costa Rica.
And I am so jealous. I would recommend. I spent 10 days in Costa Rica with my dad about 10 or 12 years ago. Wonderful, wonderful experience. I'm completely jealous that you're there. And as much as I like where I live in California, Costa Rica would be a great place to be. So if we see a little bit of latency or a chicken walk by, then that's why it's going to be this way. So, Jacqueline, let's actually start by talking a little. A lot of people know who you are already, but let's talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we're going to talk about some research that you guys have, some data that you have about where we are with staffing and how people feel about working in senior living. So,
absolutely. Thank you, Steve, for inviting me today. And hi, everyone. If we don't already know each other, my name is Jacquelyn Kung, and I have been in this industry for, I was counting the other day, about 30 years. I started at age 12, volunteering in a nursing home. I'm in my early 40s now. So I'm really passionate about this area and have been since my preteen days. And I've been fortunate enough to be executive director at a senior living property in Virginia. And so I see that there are a whole lot of things that we do really well, and then also a lot of opportunity to improve. So now I head up a company called Activated Insights. And what we do is we help providers collect feedback from both their employees as well as their customers, residents and family members, in order to improve. But not only that, which, sounds lots of fun to lots of people, but also to get recognition for the good work going on. So we're best known for Fortune's Best Places to Work in aging services. What a lot of people don't know we also do is that we help on the resident survey side, and we help providers get recognition there as well. So really excited to be here today and happy to share all this mound of data that we have.
Cool. So we're going to talk about missed opportunities, right? And it's all database. So let's talk about where your data comes from first, and then we'll start going into the missed opportunities, the blind spots.
Sure. As I mentioned, we are, I believe, the biggest survey company in senior care now. We're in every segment of senior care, and then we have a lot of presence in senior living, where we have over 4,000 locations, independent living, assisted living, memory care, and CCRC communities. And so this is where the data comes from, both on the employee side, where we survey with the Great Place to Work Trust Index survey, as well on the resident and family member side, where we survey with some of the best-in-class survey tools available, which is CoreQ, UCLA, loneliness scales, and also what we did was we took the best from the research and put it in the survey tool.
Great. So talk to me about blind spots, missed opportunities, dollar value, and what all that means.
Yes, great question. It's huge. The short of it is that there's about $3 million that senior living operators might be missing in terms of their lower performing communities, the lower 40% of performing communities compared to the top 40% of performing communities. It's a $3 million difference in property valuation. It's a
per building.
Per building, you got it. It's big.
That's a lot of money.
It's big.
Okay, and talk to me about what that blind spot. I mean, what's the difference between what makes it? Here's really the question: what's the difference between the low performing and the high performing buildings?
Yeah, good question. So there are many differences in terms of what the data reveals. You know, a good friend of mine is Chris Hollister, who's CEO of Pegasus Senior Living. And he says, you know, when you visit one community, you've visited one community. When you visit another community, it's a whole different story. So in general, every community has a different.
Uh-oh. I hate it when it freezes. This is the adventure of being out and about. We're going to give Jacqueline a minute here to come back. While we're hoping that she comes back, the thing I would like to say is this is an area I've been thinking about so much as I'm talking to those of you who are operators that there's this great opportunity. I think we're at this inflection point in senior living where one of two things is going to happen. Right now, what we see is that primarily senior living is need driven, and that's always going to be there. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's terrific. We meet an important need for a lot of older people. And I'm hoping, Erin, that she's coming back. So I'm just going to riff and talk a little bit about my dream. But I think that we have this opportunity right now in senior living. People are wondering about senior living. First thing we know is that, according to Nick, of course, that the number of communities that had no deaths in senior living was very, very high. Very different narrative than what you would get just watching the television, reading newspapers, being on the internet, and looking at that. The second thing is we have this huge opportunity because we actually know senior living better. We know caring for residents better than anybody else. We really understand the aging process better. So my big dream for senior living, and it starts ultimately with the team members and it starts with programming, but my big, big dream for senior living is this, that somehow, some way, we become that thing where as people get older, they go, oh man, I'm going to go to senior living when I get to that age because that'll give me the chance to stealing Chip Connolly's term, to regenerate, to have great moments in my life, to make new friends, to create new things, to become creative, to do wonderful, wonderful things. And I think that that's really the opportunity that we have before us. And so the question that we're going to have to ask ourselves is, are we going to just be this need-driven thing? And I guess if that's okay, I think some companies will only be focused on that. And I think that that's a terrific thing. But imagine what the world would be like if we had a few senior living operators out there who said, you know what, we're going to be the meaning makers for older people. We're going to assume that when people come into our communities that they still have amazing potential to create, to build relationships, to mentor, to make the world a better place. That is completely our opportunity. Welcome back. I've just been ripping away while you were gone. So it's this.
I've been in Costa Rica all week, and internet has been perfect. Electricity has been perfect. Of course, when we're on live TV is the time that electricity goes out.
Of course, I have had that problem. I did a keynote for the New Zealand Lodge Association, which is sort of CCRCs, last week. And my internet in California went out halfway through the presentation, and we were just dead. Okay, so we were talking about this $3 million gap being, if you've been into one community, you've been into one community. Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so your question, I believe, was the difference between high scoring and low scoring communities in terms of customer engagement. Yeah, and so there are a few differences that we see. The most important one, I don't think will be a surprise to you, Steve, which is that the highest scoring communities have very happy employees. They also, relatedly, have very low, relative to the lower performing, very low employee turnover. And it's not just in leadership positions, but lower employee turnover. So that is actually the main theme that we're seeing in the
So,
higher
and
performance when
so I
it
want to
comes
stop you
to.
here for just. I want to stop you here for just a second. And the reason they have lower turnover and they're happier is because they get paid more money, right?
Oh, absolutely. They get paid, millions of dollars, right? Yeah.
Oh,
No,
so
it's
maybe
the
so it's not
same.
that.
So it's
Go
the
ahead.
same. It's the same pay. I'm talking about when we do studies within the same brand. So usually within a senior living operator, let's say you have 100 communities or 200 communities, you're using a similar pay scale for the types of roles that you have, and you adjust them a little bit to the markets that you're in, right? California pay might be a little bit higher than, say, Texas pay. But no, it's basically the same pay. We're being sarcastic when we say, yes, they're paying more. No, it's the same.
Yes, we are. So talk to me about what those leaders are doing differently in these high performance to make people love working there versus the low performing buildings.
Yeah. The leaders are doing a number of things. The first thing is that they're not stuck behind the computer doing paperwork. They find a way, around shortcuts around that. And what that means is that they can spend more time on the floor, meaning they do management by walking around. And when they're walking the floor, they're helping you plunge the toilet. They're helping you, get the residents out of bed. So they're helping and working right alongside you. That's the second thing. The third thing that we're seeing is that they are showing one-on-one appreciation and attention, both positively and negatively. So when someone is doing a great job, these leaders stop and say, hey, I noticed you did this. That's awesome because the effect it had was this. And then when they see something that isn't right, they address it right then. Oftentimes people let things fester or show favoritism to someone that they, like or has been around a long time. And these leaders do not do that.
Yeah, and that is so. This really hits home to me because we had a new partner that came on board and we did something that wasn't quite right and they called us out on it. And the person who did it because they didn't have complete information. It was an accident, right? And she felt so bad about it. And so my first thing was, we just learned from this. We don't want it to happen again, but we're not going to beat you up about it because we know when we beat people up, right, it actually makes them fearful, and they don't do that. So I love that. So,
but Steve, I don't want to miss this point, which is, what you asked is what's the difference between high performing communities and lower performing communities, right? And we were talking about financial margin in terms of performance, but it's the canary in the bird mine. The canary in the mine here is that they have happier customers, family members, as well as residents. And what causes happier residents and family members is much more engaged employees who don't leave as much. So it's all of those, and we're measuring that whole chain of events, and we now have the data to show that. And this impact, the financial impact, is pretty enormous. It's millions of dollars. And so the story I want to highlight here is we were last week actually talking to a VP of resident experience, and their data is very clear that it's employee experience leads to resident experience. And he goes, why are we talking about employee experience so much? What programs can we do? What thing can we do centrally? And because you want to, when you're in the corporate office, you want to create a program and you want to roll it out. Those things, yes, help. However, it's really the root of treating your employees the way that you'd want to be treated, across the population.
So do you see, as you're looking at the data, do you see that some organizations are sort of across the board better at that than others, or do you find it very random that in an organization you'll have some high performing and some low performing based on primarily the executive director? What does your data show on that?
That's a terrific question. In general, we see that providers show a lot of difference between, 20 communities or 50 communities. However, there is one provider that is very consistent. And it probably is not a surprise to a lot of people in this industry that Brightview, their experience is much more consistent, whichever Brightview community you're at. Whether you're an employee or whether you're a resident or a family member, their experiences are much, much more consistent. And I think the secret sauce behind Brightview, there are many sauces and lotions and potions, right? But I think the one that makes a real difference is that Brightview promotes from within. So let's say that again. Brightview promotes from within. So the problems that you solve with that is one of the problems that everyone brings up with senior care is low wages, right? When you promote from within, you are helping people get up the pay scale and actually not only getting paid more, but you're creating careers for them and creating opportunities for their families to blossom. So they're solving that. The second thing that they're solving is when you bring in someone from the outside, do they know how things work? Probably not. It takes some time. So when you promote from within, these folks already know how you do things and they bring that culture with them. So both on the employee side to create consistent employee experiences, as well as create consistent customer experiences. And then the third thing that it does is it's a real booster to morale, right? You work there and then you see a peer being promoted and you're like, that could be me next week or next month. So it's a boost to morale. So Brightview does many things really well. One of them is promote from within, and and what results are consistent experiences on employees and customers.
So I really, really like that, but I want to actually dig a little deeper into this because I think we need to spend more time talking about these companies that are really standouts, right? I have to believe that one of the reasons they're able to promote from within is because even when people start out, they like working there. And so how do they start that employee journey so from the very beginning, it's a great experience for them?
That's a really good question. And so if you have a friend at Brightview, a great thing to do would be to call your friend, since I don't work there, right? However, what I have learned—
They're on my list to go interview now, by the way.
Oh, yeah. They're all quite busy there. So getting an interview would be great with them.
Yep.
So what I can share is what they've shared with me, which is when they bring on some new people, they, number one, very much hire for the culture and hire for the personality fitting the culture, which is the Brightview way. Secondly, for certain positions and roles, what they do is they bring everyone to the central office in Maryland. And it's an investment of both resources for travel as well as time, right, of these people being gone for a couple days. However, one of the things that you can do in person that doesn't happen in Zoom, and Brightview does, is kind of like an ask me anything, and nothing is off limits. So they've gotten so many different kind of questions, tough questions from new hires, and they answer them. And some of these new hires have said, once they're onboarded and everything, they say, I've never had a company do that, where they actually just say, ask me anything, and they answer honestly. And so what that does is it takes off the kind of skepticism a lot of when you're a new hire, you're saying, is this the Kool-Aid? Am I drinking it? And so, and Brightview does a beautiful job of bringing on new hires.
That is really cool. So, what are you seeing? Where do I go next? As you look at the data as we're coming out of the pandemic and opening back up, what's the data telling you about family expectations, needs, desires?
Good question. So three things here. One is that many senior living providers have actually been reticent, so wary of getting feedback from their residents and families. And I would say this is actually the time to be getting feedback from your residents and families, because, during COVID, many more forward-thinking providers were, but many were not. And then now as things reopen, you want to know what your baseline is, right? And then improve upon that. So that's the first thing. So if you aren't getting feedback from your residents and families, this is a great time to do so. Secondly, one of the trends that we're seeing, it's very clear. The difference between data from kind of January to April, when things were not quite reopened and just chit chat about reopening, you know, vaccines and reopening, versus May and June. Guess when people are happier? May and June. So, so family members and residents are both much happier now. The data is very clear. What is interesting is that residents are much happier than family members. That's maybe expected, but also happier. Like, you know, of your residents, you have happy residents and you have very happy residents, right? Your very happy residents. There are many more very happy residents.
Yeah, well, I can imagine that the going from being locked down to being able to go back to a normal life or close to normal life has got to be very, very happy. So one thing I think you said, so I've got to check this and make sure I said it right, is that you're saying that residents are overall happier than families. Why is that? I would have thought the families would be happier than the residents. So I'm really curious about that.
Isn't it fascinating?
It is, yeah.
It's something that usually people don't expect. So a couple reasons that we, you know, can glean. One is it's more fun, I think, human nature to talk about the negative things. So maybe as a family member and you're chatting on the phone to your daughter or your son, you know, you complain more. My mother-in-law certainly does. She tells us all about her, you know, the lamb wasn't cooked the way she would have cooked it. And, you know, this resident, you know, is a XYZ politician supporter. And oh my gosh, I can't believe they let in people like that. You know, so she does. But then when you ask her, my mother-in-law said that moving to the CCRC where she is was the best decision in her life. And I said, even more so than who you married? And she goes, yeah, probably.
Wow.
So, I mean, that shows you the magnitude. So when you're a family member and you don't know how to equilibrate what you're hearing in all these complaints, you may think things aren't that great, right? Or you go there and you thin slice. Like, and usually family members visit on weekends, right?
Yeah.
And you miss the whole Monday through Friday experience when most, you know, activities and actually the community is really alive Monday through Fridays. That's just a whole nother thing that we need to address as an industry. But then you see that as family. So you have that thin slicing going on. So number one, the residents probably complain more and actually don't tell their family members their true feelings, maybe because of human nature. And number two, family members thin slice. And so when they visit on weekends, yes, parking is a problem. And maybe the food is not the same as, you know, or the amenities and it's not as clean on Sunday afternoon as Friday morning.
Yep. Okay, so Aaron Reed asked a question. I want to actually pop this up because I think this is really an important thing. My experience was that many providers who discount feedback they get, claiming that only the most unhappy residents fill out surveys, etc. They'd ask for commit to input, then dismiss it. I was actually party to another email that somebody sent me that just to share with me, where they talked about how management has all these resident committees where they get resident input and they're really proud of the management committees, except that what really happens is when they, after the committees meet and they talk about what they want, management actually just goes out and does whatever they want anyway. So I talked about this idea that residents, you know, don't really get listed, that it's just the complaining residents and you can't make them happy. Is that true?
There is some truth to that. Some
Okay.
residents, we just see survey over survey, are just not happy. And, you know, as a former ED, I know there's some people that aren't. However, the problem with, I think that Aaron is highlighting is that a lot of resident surveys and family member surveys don't have good response rates. The way we've solved that is we actually text message. So our response rates are like a majority respond. So you're getting, you know, a majority of people's voices versus a minority. And the minority can be very loud, like you're saying, Steve.
Yeah. Well, and I think that I guess I'm sort of, you know, and maybe your data doesn't prove this out, but I think that in many respects, I find as a writer that my biggest critics, as painful as it sometimes is, and sometimes, you know, it's not legitimate, but I actually learn a ton from those people about what they're thinking about. And I think to dismiss those, even the ones who are kind of complainers all the time, it doesn't mean you can't learn anything from them. So.
Oh, absolutely. And I would agree with that. What I think some of the best operators do is they look at feedback and if they see trends, right, rather than just from one person or another. When you see trends across many people, and especially when you get good response, like good participation, and you start seeing the trends and you take action on that, that's much more effective. And when the providers that we work with pulse survey those that have taken action on the trends and themes. And by the way, it's not just communication. A lot of people chalk it up to better communication. It's not. Like there are some, specific things that often go a long way, more than even quote unquote better communication. So yeah, I would say it's themes, and sometimes your noisiest and least happy residents have like they are really stuck on something, but it may be part of a bigger theme, and absolutely you should listen to it.
Yeah, I would even wonder, I don't know, it'd be interesting to maybe look at some data and see is, again, you were talking about the canary in the coal mine, and I wonder if maybe in some cases those most complaining residents are the canary in the coal mine that can highlight earlier, faster potential problems that you have the opportunity to work on. So we're sort of running low. Go ahead. Go.
On that, those residents are, and the thing to be tracking is move outs due to dissatisfaction. And we find between top and bottom performing, the difference in move outs in an average size assisted living is 10 to 15 a year.
Wow, really?
And I mean, you've paid a lot of money to have these people move in, right? Like you spent a ton of time getting them to move in, and why are you losing them? So that's another blind spot.
So so I'm not sure I got the number right, or maybe you didn't give it to me. So high performing versus low performing, typical difference in number of move outs a year is 10 to 15?
The difference between high and low. The typical number of move outs ranges in this industry between 6-7% of residents who move in a year to up to almost 30%.
Okay, for reasons of dissatisfaction.
Okay, that total move outs could be due to death, it could be due to medical emergency, it could be due to dissatisfaction. Of the dissatisfaction, when you have happy residents versus unhappy residents by your score,
right,
the difference is 10 to 15 a year, which it adds up to a few $100,000.
Yeah, I mean that's a massive number. That's a massive number, right? And ultimately that's what contributes to that loss in capital value for the building. So if I were an executive director and I was watching this interview, what are my big takeaways that I should walk away from for this?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. So I'm a former executive director myself, right? And the three things that we are often evaluated on and that we often are just trying to prioritize is number one, our financials, number two, happy customers, and number three, happy staff, right? Those are the three things. And I would say as an ED, the best thing to do is do them in reverse order. So work on happier staff, and that will lead to, happier residents, and happier residents will lead to financial performance. We see that in the data time and time again. And I think the overall message for EDs is that, as an ED, I liked to do things like make my staff happier and make my help make my families and residents happier. Those are things I like to do. So do more of what you like to do, I think, is the message for EDs.
Well, and what's fascinating to me about this challenge that you've really given the whole industry is the things you need to do to make your staff happy. They only take time. It's not like it takes a big investment in money, or it's just paying attention and doing something, right?
Let me give you an example. So one community's leadership team found that their scores weren't what they wanted them to be. And they also found that people were not looking forward to coming to work. That's one of the questions on the Great Place to Work survey. And what they did was 30 minutes before a shift change and 30 minutes after the shift change, they started playing music. And an hour of music a day made a big difference. And people just kind of bounced into work a little bit more and bounced out of work a little bit more,
cool.
Right? And that small thing didn't cost any more money, but it was thoughtful and it was appreciated, and you saw some score increases.
Cool. Okay, one more question for you, and that is, if I'm a senior leadership, CEO, COO, VP of Ops, what should I be taking away from this?
I would say three things. Number one, you want to be baselining your customer scores. Don't be afraid of surveying them, and use them in marketing, get Google reviews out of them, etc. Number two, you want to identify your gaps. And usually it's a surprise for home offices how much the scores range and why. So identify your gaps. And that's because your brand is hurting when you don't do so. Number three is to set some clear goals. It's shocking how not clear some of the goals set out of home offices are. So prioritize and be ruthless in terms of communicating clearly. Then, hold people accountable as you monitor progress. And then you want to, and this in the third category, also part of accountability is checking in, doing pulse check surveys to see that things are improving. Because some people in this industry are excellent at managing up, and you think that they're doing it, and then a year later you do the survey and you say, oh my gosh, nothing happened, or actually it got worse. So let's not wait for that. So three things. Number one, you want to baseline your customer engagement scores and use them in marketing. There are lots of great things happening. Number two, you want to identify your gaps so that your brand doesn't hurt, right? You want a consistently good experience, Ritz-Carlton style, Starbucks style. Number three, you want to be setting goals, holding people accountable, and actually doing something to monitor, i.e. pulse checking.
Gotcha. So this sort of philosophical question I want to actually end with. To me, this all seems like no-brainer stuff. Why is it that we have so many people not doing it, do you think?
Yeah.
I know it's just an opinion. I mean, you may have some data on it, but it's maybe just an opinion. It's baffling to me.
I love your questions because they are so obvious, right? Let me just share the story of, through the Great Place to Work Universe, we work with a lot of different companies. And someone from Home Depot shared that Home Depot, one day a guy showed up to a meeting and he had a stack of papers about 3.5 feet high. And he put it on the conference table. And he said, guys, I printed out every single piece of paper that we sent out from this home office here in Georgia to our store managers. I printed everyone out. This was the stack from last week. So that story, I think, illustrates what's happening here in our industry as well. A lot of providers just allow anyone to send everything to our equivalent of store managers, which are the GMs or EDs. And no wonder it's hard to get, some of these basic things done.
Yeah. And I would sort of back that up saying that I've got a number of friends who are EDs, and one of the things that I hear from them is that their corporate office has so many expectations for reports, checklists, and meetings that they don't have enough time to get out and do that human stuff. And it's really, it's a little bit like the government. The government solves every problem by making another rule or regulation, and often that makes it worse rather than better. And senior living organizations, particularly large organizations, tend to solve every problem by adding another checklist, another rule, another system. And there's no doubt we need some systems, right? But we don't necessarily need all of them. And if they become so burdensome that you create your own problem, and the very thing that you're trying to fix, you're making worse. So with that, Jacqueline, thank you very much. It's been a great conversation. Next week, actually, I've got a professor coming on who wrote a book called Great Job Strategy. She talks about how to create great jobs, how companies that are hiring frontline people are paying them 2 and 3 times as much as other companies are. So think somebody working in a 7-Eleven who's making $40,000 a year or $80,000 a year as a manager. Nobody would ever think that's true. There are companies who are doing this. There are applications for senior living. I'm a big fan of this book. I can hardly wait. And in the meantime, I'm going to want to just do a little plug I'm going to do one other thing first. So if people want to get in touch with you, how do they find you?
You can go to activatedinsights.com, and then my email is jkung@activatedinsights.com. We have a ton of free resources. Just pull things down. There's a little form where you fill in your name and email. There's only one person, Amy, who gets it. So she can be in touch if you have any questions as well. So
great. And you're very findable on LinkedIn as well, right?
I am.
Yeah. So we developed this little texting community. We're not spamming you or selling you stuff out of it. If you'd like to join us, we're going to send you little love notes occasionally. Text to the 916-659-5287, just the word TV, and that way we'll know where you came from. And thank you very much for watching. Jacqueline, thank you very much for being on. More importantly than that, thank you very much for having this passion to making this wonderful, wonderful industry better for team members, residents, and families.
Same to you, Steve. Thank you for all that you do. It's been a pleasure.